Isn't going to be super structured. I was just asked to talk about sort of what happened to me after college, and then I wanted to talk to you guys about what it is to be in a TV writing room in Los Angeles, which is where most of my experience lies. So please feel free to ask questions as I go, or if you have a question now. Does anyone have any questions about these two shows that you just watched? I'm happy to answer before we kind of go into something a little more personal. And so like I said, I went to NYU Tisch. I graduated in 2005. I was lucky because I was already from Southern California. I grew up in Goleta, Santa Barbara. So I kind of knew what LA was. I at least knew what it looked like. We went and visited my grandparents there when I was little. So it wasn't like I was jumping into the complete unknown but I decided to move there right after college. My parents are amazing, but they're both hardworking middle class. So Tisch was a stretch for us financially, and I graduated early in order to get out of here because I didn't want to pay full 4 years of tuition, and it was really important to me, and it has been a driving factor of my time in LA of working for money, not just to pursue my creative impulses in my life as an artist, which unfortunately will always be the case. And that's something I want to talk to you guys about, because I know when I was at Tisch, it was really driven into me, this idea of being an auteur and working on your own projects, and how important that is. And that is so important. But also important is surviving and feeling like you're independent and not feeling like you're beholden to anybody. And that is power, right? There's power that comes from using your creative voice, from making those projects, and there's also power from sustaining yourself in an industry that's very hard, and as you guys made the movie, harder for women traditionally. So to say that I have always kind of walked that line between doing things I'm incredibly passionate about and working in the industry, not only to survive, but because I knew that working meant more work, and working meant climbing a ladder, however you want to use that terminology. I was just sort of a worker bee through my 20s. And that's something that I both regret is the wrong word, but people like Cameron and Rhea are a really interesting reflection of somebody like me. Rhea, and she struggles with it in the show, Cameron left college and was like, I'm going to do this. I'm only going to do comedy, and that is all. And I don't care how poor I am. I'm just going to work clubs every night. And that's what she did. But she also came from a family who, could help her a little. Like, she had everybody has a different story that way too, right? It's not just your cultural identity or your race or your sexual identity. It's also your economic identity, right? And how much that plays into the decisions you make. So that's always been important for me to sort of make people aware of. Like I said before in a question, I worked for Miranda July right out of college, and she was like my hero, and she still is so my hero. And just to start you off with like a little story anecdotally, so I worked for her, but I also had to nanny because I worked for Miranda July for about 5 hours a week, paid for $10 an hour. So that's $50 a week, plus a lot of time I just did for free for her, which was amazing because I learned so much, and it was so influential to be that close to a hero. But it didn't allow me to pay my rent or anything like that. So I also nannied for my first year right out of college and beyond. And then I started getting assistant jobs in TV, and those were jobs that I learned so much in because I was a I was lucky enough that my first TV job, I wasn't just a PA, which is where a lot of people start, and I would say take those jobs. I was lucky enough to somehow get this writer's assistant slash EP slash script coordinator job, which are like the 3 assistant parts of a writer's room, because it was such a low budget kids show, like I was telling you about, that I didn't know any better, that's usually 3 people. So I did all those jobs, my first show, South of Nowhere, for 2 years. And then because of a person who was the staff writer on that, I got an interview on 24, which is a much bigger show, obviously. And I worked on that for 2 years as the script coordinator. That show didn't have a writer's assistant. I'll go into like these things a little bit more later. But while I was on 24, I really struggled a lot because that show had 12 writers, all male, all white, all cis, all over the age of like 45, all very wealthy. They didn't allow a writer's assistant in the room. They had tried to have a woman on staff 1 season and decided it didn't work out, and then decided to pay the minority. There's a punishment if you don't hire minority writers in Hollywood, and they decided to just pay that in lieu of hiring a female staff writer. So I was working on that for the last 2 seasons. So I was their researcher, I was their script coordinator, I was there all the time, because 24 is an intense show, and we shot 2 episodes at once. So I basically gave them the majority of my life at that time, but I was also still interning essentially, but producing for Miranda July, for free on the weekends. I curated a show that she did. I produced a performance piece that she did, and she was prepping to do her second feature while I was working on 24. And 24, the head writer there, Howard Gordon, who is an amazing man, as much as I talk about sort of the sickness of the patriarchal system in Hollywood, doesn't mean that the individuals are bad guys. He's an amazing writer and was such an agent for me. Wanted to give me credit on one of the scripts, so wanted me to write an episode of 24, which was crazy because honestly, while I admire the show so much, I was not a fan of the show. I was not I'm a fan of James Ivory / Amelie. That's my wheelhouse, and this was where's the bomb? But that was a huge opportunity because it would have been one of my first scripted credits, which is a huge thing. If you need an agent, it's one of those weird, do you have credits? You need those things, right? At the same time, Miranda July was like, Shauna, I'm making my second movie, and I'd really love you to be my right-hand person. I want you to come on as the script supervisor, which is a weird way of her being able to hire me without giving me a title that was that would allow me to be right next to her at the monitors, but not actually pay me. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those, script supervisor is a great job, and you learn so much doing it. But it's not a title, it's not your name on a script, right? So I made, and of course it happened at the exact same time. 2 really kind of amazing, different, good opportunities continue to exist with Miranda July, your hero in the independent film world, but really as an assistant, or take that first script in a much more kind of mainstream show, but it's not your voice. It doesn't promote sensitivity or a culture that you believe in, really, but it will allow you that next step through whatever door it is that you want to get through. And everybody told me at the time, take the script, dummy. Because also it was get paid to write a script. Don't be an idiot. So I took the script. But I have to be honest, since that was 2008, I regretted it. I felt that was the moment when I sort of, and I tend to talk in extremes, so I'm sorry guys. These are not life-death decisions at all. This is I still went home and made peppermint tea and I was fine. But I kind of always regretted it because it was the moment that I could really pinpoint in my 10 years post-college where I decided a path. And it was not the one that was maybe truest to who I was as a person. But it did allow me to walk through doors. It did allow me to get an agent. It did allow me to get the next job with one of those writers, which then led me to get another job, which then staffed me. You know, it was a different path. I don't know what would have happened if I had stuck with Miranda as her kind of assistant person. I will never know. But so just cut to then. A few years later, like I said, I was staffed on anger management. And it was a similar dynamic where I was now a writer, but the only woman writer in the room. There were 14 of us, 7 in each room. So the other room had 2 writers. There was one in mine. We were there for 3 years, again, all the time. It's a thing in Hollywood that you are told very quickly, there's no such thing as like a 12-hour work, like unless you're union, then, which I am, but in the writer's room, it's all up to whatever the head writer decides how long your day will be. So we were there like till all hours of the night. It was in this depressing little office without windows, but at the same time, I do want to make the point that I was learning how to write sitcoms. I was learning how to tell a joke. We produced 2 episodes a week. It was like being in medical school, like cutting up bodies, basically. Like it taught me how to run and write a show in such a succinct, like factory style way. So then now I can go on a show like Take My Wife and be like, why don't we break all those rules? Or why don't we use this convention but do something else? So that is all true. Like so many things can be true at once, you know? So at the time, this is the end of my story, this is longer than I thought, Miranda asked me to come watch this new performance she was going to do, to like give her notes. And I lied to my boss, because you're not supposed to miss work. And I said I had a doctor's appointment, but really I just went to sit by myself in Miranda's living room and watch her one-woman show. It was so weird, because she was just like doing it right in front of me. And I played, she does interactive stuff, so I was like every audience member. And like the narcissist I probably am, after I watched this like beautiful show that she did, I just started crying. And I was like, oh my God, Miranda, it was so good. I was like, I have to tell you, like, 4 years ago you asked me to do this movie with you, and I said no, and I just feel like that was the moment that I sold out. And like, I don't know, I'm sorry, I feel like I really let you down. And she's like, I don't even remember that. And she said, Shauna, we all are so different. We all have different needs. We all have to like feed ourselves. We all have to figure out. And what I said earlier, I didn't mean that to be a negative thing. I think that's why I'm telling you this story. She said, you learn when you get to quit. Right? Like you learn when enough is enough, and you've learned that lesson, and then you go do whatever amazing things you're supposed to do. And maybe that is you interning on a film this summer. For me, it was working on anger management for 3 years. And for somebody else, it's like 2 years. It's that moment when you figure out that your voice is also vital, and that you deserve, and it's not only what's better for you, but it's better for everyone else around you to be true to it. But I say that again, and this is why I tell you this story, with the understanding that you need to work. That is the most important thing, because I wouldn't have any of these experiences if I didn't say yes to 24 or yes to anger management. And I don't regret any of them, but because of them, I have all the experiences that I can now write a show like Take My Wife about what it means to be the only girl in a group of stand-ups, because I was the only girl in a group of writers for 8 years. So Miranda wrote me a letter that day, and I just wanted to read it to you, because as always, she is more eloquent than anybody else, which is very infuriating. She wrote, "You feeling crazy and conflicted right now is the natural and correct thing. That's what's going to lead you to the next phase. This struggle, art versus responsible life, is the struggle. You would be dealing with it one way or another right now anyway. and probably through most of your 30s too. Please go easy on Shauna. She is not doing anything wrong. She's very smart and learning all about herself, which is her job. Sometimes you have to learn in ways that kind of gross yourself out, just to learn what your limits are. So I think I just wanted to kind of tell you guys that story because that's really been the main lesson for me since I graduated Tisch. And there are so many other lessons along with that. But my thing has always been to say yes to jobs. I never have quit a job, and I always say yes to interviews. Last year, my agent sent me to interview to write video game stories, and I know that's not my style either, but I went on the interview because every person you meet is important. Every time you enter a room, you tell people who you are immediately, and that is so important. You learn about what's going on, even if you decide you don't want to do that thing, and that's so important. So yeah, I never say no. I do say no to jobs now, but not to that first inquiry, and I never quit. Unless, you know, and not that quitting is wrong if you feel violent, like all the things Cameron said is true. But I do want to say there's something valuable to the other side of the person who sludges through, right? Which is part of the reason, I mean, I wear Hillary pins and stuff. I'm like so on Hillary's team because she has never quit. And it is anecdotal and it is identity politics, but I really understand that idea of just being the person who's in there for the really long haul. And that's important too, because that's why I'm now running rooms, because I have all that experience, you know, because I was in all those rooms. People are like, oh, you worked on this show and this show and this show. Oh, you know a lot more about TV than I do. And it's true because I was on all those shows. Well, and there's something so incredibly valuable from being the person, like Comedy Bang Bang is a huge UCB graduation program, sort of like everybody who does UCB, who writes their own sketches, who goes through all the mod. Do you guys know UCB? Mm-hmm. Upright Citizens Brigade. That culture really promotes doing it yourself, which is also really important. Make movies on the weekend, all those things. But there's a marriage that happens between people like that who are self-taught and who are saying, I'm just going to do it myself. I'm going to be my own director and my own producer and my own writer right out of the gate. And people like me, not to say I haven't done stuff like that, but people who adhere more to this sort of system, who are assistants and work their way up the ladder like that, once you get to sort of the next level, it's where those two people meet, because these guys need people like me, and I need people like them who are a little more, brave's not the right word, but a little more irreverent and a little less confined. Does that all make sense? Is that helpful? I don't know. Do you guys have any questions? I was just going to talk to you about what a writer's room is, essentially. But any questions about my career or anything like that?
I guess, like, what made you, because as a creative person, it's always the question when you graduate of whether you're going to work at a bar and on the side write and try to meet with people as much as you can and not get stuck at your bar job versus maybe interning and being on like the office side, which is not really what you want to do, but you get to meet the right people. Like, did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the beginning of what I'm trying to speak to. It's like those people do rise up too. I didn't have bar jobs. Yeah. I was that office person. There isn't a right or wrong way. It's really what you can stand. I am a kind of really organized, I like correcting. I was student body president multiple times. Like, I really liked being in office. As much as I complained about it, I also feel at home in kind of office culture. And I really liked being a writer's assistant because you're essentially a fly on the wall. And you learn so much just by being there. I just wrote something about this because I'm trying to go to this like showrunner training program, but they were asking me like, what's your experience? And I counted all the showrunners I've worked for, and there have been 11. So that's 11 people I've watched do the job that I knew I wanted to do when I was 19 years old, and that's been an incredible education. And that's something that some people I work with don't have. And so someone like Cameron worked at bars or worked during the day and then just did comedy. And while she's incredibly apt and learned so quickly and obviously has no problem commanding a group of people, she didn't know how to run a show. And I think she would tell you that. And that's why she hired me. And that's a position that a lot of people don't talk about, is sort of the next person. Like Tina Fey has Robert Carlock, you know? Anybody who ran The Office had that next person. You always have like your sort of number two, and I don't want to be that person forever, but that person is sort of known in Hollywood as being the one that actually meets deadlines and gets the scripts out the door, and it's the person that knows how to keep the show running. You're not the person like in front of the camera necessarily. And that was I never really wanted to be in front of the camera, but it took me a long time to know that that person existed and I could be that too. Anything else? Questions?
Uh-oh. No, I just was going to say, maybe you just want to speak really quickly to your transition from drama to comedy.
Yeah, so I was, thanks, Mom. So I kind of accidentally landed in drama, but I didn't know that I wanted to be, I didn't know I was funny. My mom is obviously funny, and I was her straight man growing up. But I didn't really do improv in college. I really liked watching it. I didn't really realize that watching Conan every night and SNL and all these things made me actually, and only sitcoms made me actually want to write that versus comedy, because there was a whole other side of me that just like only liked my so-called life. So I kind of accidentally landed at 24, and that was a really good job. And then one of those writers took me to Dexter, so I was there for 2 years. And that was also a really good job. And my job on both of those shows was script coordinator, which I'll talk about what those different things mean. But while I was on Dexter, I just suddenly hit this wall where I could not read another Dexter monologue, voiceover monologue. And that was my whole job, was just reading those monologues. I read them and was like, so Dexter's voiceover on page 4 sort of mirrors his voiceover on page 12, and I wonder if you didn't want to talk about, like, you know, the metaphor of how the body, you know, whatever, all those things. I just realized suddenly that the majority of dramas write in the voice their characters in these extremities, right? Like, it's not how we actually talk to each other, where we're just making jokes and we're also saying something serious, and then we make another deflective joke, and it's like, and that's me all the time, is just deflecting and using humor. And I was like, oh, wait. Oh, you want to be a comedy writer. Which, like Rhea, so we both kind of started late, because I was in drama until I was about, 2008. 26, 27. And then I just started hunting for assistant jobs that were comedy, and I started writing comedy. And I answered this really weird ad on this listserv. Writers' assistants have listservs out there to help you get jobs. Find them and sign up. And it was this really shady ad. It was veteran comedy producer seeks writer's assistant to travel with him to Chicago to write a pilot. He will put you up in a hotel. He does not have an office, so he will have to meet you at a coffee shop. Please send resumes to this bullshit email. And I was so desperate. I was just like, yep. So I did. I went and I met across the street from Dexter at Groundworks Coffee Shop this veteran comedy producer. He wouldn't tell me his name. I was like, I'm going here. Like everybody at my office, I'm going here. You can see me from the window. And it was Bruce Helford who had ran, who created Drew Carey. He ran Family Ties. He ran Roseanne. He created the George Lopez show. He was semi-retired, and it was all true. He didn't have an office anymore. He was writing his first pilot back after like a 10-year hiatus. We went to Chicago. He put me up in the Hyatt, like the nicest hotel room I've ever had. And there were, and this is good to my last whole story, 4 guys from Northwestern who had created a web series by themselves, and it was so good, and they all still lived in Chicago. And because it was so good, some kid that they went to college with was now like an agent's assistant, had somehow represented them and gotten them a pilot deal at Sony. They still all lived in Chicago. I knew more about TV for sure than they did, but I didn't have a pilot deal from living in Chicago. So I went to be their assistant, and I was the same age as them. And we wrote a pilot, and that pilot didn't sell or didn't get made. And then Bruce believed in them so much that he paid, because 90s sitcom money is no joke. He paid for them to produce their pilot, hoping that would make it more, like, somebody would be like, oh yes, let's put this on the air. Nobody did. But because of that, I had that relationship with Bruce Helford, and then he hired me as a writer on anger management, which I went back to drama after that pilot to work for Howard Gordon again on this show called Awake for NBC. If this is too much minutia, please. I went back to work for Howard Gordon on NBC's Awake, which is a whole other story, because they bought a show from an amazing writer about a cop whose wife and son, they all get in a car crash, and he wakes up in 2 realities. In one reality, his wife has died, and in the other reality, his son has died, and the show lives in those 2 worlds. And after the pilot, NBC was like, it's really dark. We'd love it if it were more peppy. And such a lesson in like networks being like, we bought a show about 2 deaths. So that show quickly died because the network couldn't figure out what they wanted it to be. But so I was literally sitting doing my script coordinator job after Bruce had made me promises about the next show he gets, he's staffing me on, when my best friend from NYU calls me and says, Shauna, have you read Deadline? And I was like, no, because I don't read it. You should read it every day, but it also makes you sad, so don't. I mean, it's complicated. Read it like twice a week, catch up, and then don't. So I went to Deadline, and I saw that Bruce Helford had been brought on to write this show with Charlie Sheen, Anger Management. It was right after Charlie Sheen had his huge freak out and had his goddesses and tiger blood and all that, but I also knew he'd been brought on sexual assault charges 5 times and yada yada yada, and I knew it was my big break, but I also knew it would again be going against a little bit things that inside me were very important. So I just started crying at my desk. I cry a lot. Crying is power. Don't let anybody tell you differently. But so I went to anger management for 3 years, and that's how I was always writing on the side, comedy, and always taking UCB classes, and had a lot of friends in the comedy community. And then while I was at anger management, I did feel so sort of stifled, and it wasn't just me, it was also the majority of the men that worked there too, because that show was really archaic. It was about a man who every episode found a new woman he wanted to sleep with. He had no faults, which is like rule number 1 in comedy. Your main character is somebody you need to make fun of. We weren't allowed to make fun of Charlie Sheen. So instead, the default became every blonde 25-year-old he wanted to sleep with had to be crazy. So that was literally every episode. So I wasn't the only one that felt really constricted in that. Like, everybody did. It just wasn't a great show, which happens. But I started, in order to kind of have my own voice as a writer, I started doing storytelling, like The Moth, and I host a storytelling show in LA, and I've been doing that for more than 3 years. And that's how I met Cameron and Rhea. And being parts of those communities, that's really important. And going out to shows, supporting other comedians, supporting other writers is really important. Mm-hmm.
So do you pitch your own shows too?
I was just telling Susan this. I'm just starting to. So I got an agent when I worked on anger management for the first time. And when you're a staff writer, you usually you aren't allowed in your contract to go pitch shows. They kind of own you a little bit because they want all your time and they don't want you missing work to go pitch. They don't want you being taken away to go run your own show. So it's very common, and I would say it's almost like just how it is. The first time you're a staff writer, you're not going to have, unless you specifically ask for it and they agree to it, you're not going to be able to go pitch. And then after that, I got hired as a staff writer again, but higher up on bajillion-dollar property. So I just really haven't had the opportunity yet. But so this will be the first year that I kind of go out and pitch. But what you do before you go on these pitch meetings is your agent and your manager will send you out on what's called generals. Have you guys been told about generals? They're like dates. So I'm so sorry if you're socially awkward. I'm with you. I put this outfit on tonight and my mom was laughing because I wore this pantsuit, this weird thing, to a general at Amazon, and I was literally the same color as the couch. And I just sat there the whole hour just like... they're like dates. You go and they're about an hour and they want to know basically what I just... that was a little more real, but like the nice version of your origin story. And they want to know what you're interested in writing. They want to know what shows you like. And then after you go on a bunch of those, the reason you go on those is for pitching and is for staffing. So because then, let's say some Lionsgate executive that you went on a general with is hiring a show that they're staffing up a room, that they just bought a pilot, and now that pilot's has a 16-episode order, and that guy who sold that pilot has 5 people he definitely wants to hire, and then Lionsgate is like, hold on, you need to hire, which unfortunately is still the reality, 2 women. And this guy has never had to do that before. It's like, I don't know who those are. And so then I don't see them, they can't exist. And so then UTA is like, we have 80. So then they'll send you on those interviews, but that Lionsgate executive knows about you because they had a general with you. It's all very like, it's all about building relationships and taking these meetings that seem to have no purpose, really. They're so weird. You go in and you're just like, well, that was nice chatting with you. Thank you so much. And then you think you'll never see them again. But where that comes back is 6 months later when they're hiring for staffing season.
And is your manager and agent who put you forward for the generals? Yes.
Well, a lot of it is personal connections.
Okay.
So if you know managers or if you know people who work as assistants, a lot of us will now, a lot of you, I still think I'm an NYU student, guys. Like
you are, you're alumni.
Yeah. A lot of you will start off as assistants places, right? So maybe you'll be a development assistant at Comedy Central. And if you like being in development, you'll move up to be a coordinator. And if you like doing that, that's when you get put on shows. So like Comedy Central has, I don't know how many new shows every season, right? So as a coordinator or as a development executive, you're put on these different shows. You're like on teams, essentially. And then it's your job to meet those people, these writers, me, you. And so they... either you set those meetings or you tell your manager and agent if you're lucky enough to have one. I kind of know Shelly at Comedy Central, and they'll call to make you seem a little more professional, or they just have those connections, which is sort of managers and agents' job. A good amount of it is to kind of schmooze and know those people to set up those meetings. Thankfully, it's their job. Uh-huh.
So, it was talked about before that there's a lot of opportunities, the world is changing, just great stuff in general. It's been like 10 years since we moved to LA, and the job market here in New York has changed vastly, especially for television. Do you recommend moving to LA or staying here, or do you think it doesn't matter, especially for writers?
So you want to be a TV writer?
Yeah.
You want to be a comedy TV writer. I mean, I can really only speak to myself. I moved automatically to LA. And again, that was partly financially motivated. I wish, because I had such a strong group of friends and fellow filmmakers from NYU, part of me does wish I had stayed a little longer and made my own things here and developed a team, sort of. Because moving to LA is very lonely. And I think it's lonely not just for like the 21-year-old who literally knows 2 people and lives in her friend's like weird sub-converted basement. But it's also lonely, like the woman I run the storytelling show with, Lauren Cook, is a great writer-performer. Her husband is Kurt Braunohler, who's a comedian. They're pretty established, and they moved to LA just a few years ago. And it was really hard for them to make that transition because you're still new, you still don't know that many people. I don't think there's really a right answer. I mean, I would say go to LA. Nothing is permanent either. It's sort of like when you decide what college you're going to go to and you are so stressed about it and it's the biggest decision of your life, and then you realize you can transfer. You can move to LA for 6 months and try it out and then move back to New York. You can stay in New York and then move to LA. I mean, I would say more important than geography is getting yourself out there. If you want to be a comedy writer, you should definitely be making your own videos. You should be submitting to McSweeney's. Like, you should be, I sent these guys a whole list of writers programs that they're going to email anybody who RSVP'd tonight, like fellowship programs. You should be sending pilots to all those things. You should be hosting nights where 4 of your friends get together and read your pilots out loud and give each other notes. Like, you can do that whether you're in New York or LA. As far as entering the system quicker, I tend to think, because it was my trajectory, it is a little easier if you move to LA directly. There are so many jobs there, but it's like, do you want that job? You know, I'm so lucky because I never had to be an agent's assistant at an agency. That is a soul-crushing job if you don't want to be an agent. And I would say, don't take it. People do work up that way. The girl who took my spot on anger management after me started as an agent's assistant, and she knew everybody because she made those calls, but at the same time she had to be part of that culture, and it can be bad. So like, pick and choose. But yeah, I mean, I had jobs because I moved straight to LA. I think that is true. At least those types of jobs. Mm-hmm.
You've been giving a lot of advice to filmmakers, but what about actors? Do you have anything on castings or anything to share?
Yeah.
For future actual actors?
Yeah. Let's see.
It can be like just an anecdote.
Yeah.
That would be really funny.
I'm like holding myself back from telling you this anecdote because I just heard it yesterday from the lead actress on my show. But also I'm going to tell it because it's, so her first audition was in LA on a show. This is, yes, her first, so this is whenever Punk'd was on the air. Do you guys remember that show? You were like 3 years old. It was a prank show on MTV. So her first audition was she was asked to go in a bikini, and they went down the line and they said no, 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 yes, no, before they even auditioned them. Like, that's a really bad story. That doesn't happen all the time. You can say no to those auditions, and I would say no to those auditions. That kind of stuff is changing. Casting directors are good people to, when it's always good to know who they are. A lot of them go to showcases. A lot of them go to comedy nights. A lot of the times they're actors too who are reading with you. So I would say like my biggest piece of advice is just becoming part of that community. And it is a grind. It's going to be going on like maybe 4 auditions a week, or maybe no auditions, and it unfortunately sometimes it can feel a lot like a cattle call, and unfortunately sometimes things are very based on stereotypes that aren't fair and aren't true, and that's going to be your call whether you want to go to those auditions or not. I mean, that Masters of None episode, I don't know if you guys saw it, but that's a true thing. But again, for somebody like me who's a little bit more of a writer-performer, it's really about making your own opportunity, especially as women, because they're not used to seeing somebody like me as the protagonist of my own show, right? So if I want them to see what that looks like, I do have to do it myself. And so maybe that's making a web series, or that's just having like a YouTube video I make every morning, or you have a lot more power that way if you're doing it yourself, and if you find somebody you want to work with and they're writing for you. And it's also just a great, anytime anyone can click, it's such a thing, send me a link, you know, send me a link to something. So if you have those and you've made it so that it's you're putting your best foot forward and the characters that you want to be, I think that can help a lot. I'm sorry I told you that story. It was like the first one that popped in my head.
Can you talk a little bit about like having a manager versus an agent? And you said that like acquiring agents, you have to have like credits. Is it the same for managers? Or I heard that a manager is like for your career and an agent is for your next job. And if you could just like expand on that.
Yeah, I think it's as much as like the industry is changing, so is sort of the definitions of those people. But traditionally, a manager is somebody who's really invested in you. So it's a little more clear cut when you're an actor or you're a comedian or something, because it's somebody who's like knows your quote unquote brand, who knows what the right projects are for you. They're really kind of protecting you. An agent is somebody, they work in these big buildings, they have lots of clients, they do know a lot of people. They will send you on interviews. They will send you to these generals I was talking to you about. They are wanting you to work because that's how they make money. And they're I'm painting them very negatively, but they're not bad. They're important. But they also, you need them a lot of the time in order to actually get a contract done. They understand the legal side of it all. So if you don't have an agent, you're going to need to hire a lawyer, at least for the first show that you do. They need to write your contract for you. I have both. I had just an agent, but I was sort of grandfathered into UTA because of anger management. My boss there, Bruce Helford, was basically like, Shauna's cool, sign her as a client, to his junior agent, and that's how I got my agent, which doesn't happen for everybody, but it was both a blessing and a curse, because I'm at UTA, which is great, but my agent didn't get me because he saw something I wrote and was like, oh my God, she's awesome. He got me because somebody was like, she's cool. And so now he's like, okay, I guess. I mean, yeah, go over there, you know. So he's learned to know I am a good writer and can do a good job, but it took a few years to be like, hi, I am your client. Whereas the manager comes to you because they really respond to who you are as an artist, and that's a really personal relationship. I really value having them, but I know not everybody needs them.
What can a manager do?
A manager also will send you out on generals and on interviews, and my manager started in the UCB community, so she knows all those guys. She also goes to every single comedy festival. Like, everyone knows who she is. She'll be like, I met this person last week. They are so much like you because blah, blah, blah. They want to meet with you. I told them all about your pilot. They're super interested. We're going to set up a meeting in 2 weeks from now. And then also I'll be like, hey, I just finished the first draft of this thing. Will you read it and tell me what you think? And she'll do that a lot more quickly than your agent will.
I guess if you're interested in TV development, is that a job that sort of starts with writing, or how do you get there?
You want to be the person who is deciding what shows go forward. Like
I
you want
guess,
to be a
or like
development
I
person.
like giving feedback and fixing
Yeah.
things.
That doesn't have to start with writing,
Okay.
but it's very helpful that when it does. Those are jobs that traditionally happen from working up the system.
Okay.
It's very rare that a development executive just starts as a development executive, but that's not to say it doesn't happen. Like platforms like Amazon that are sort of redefining what a TV show is by saying we're auteur-driven TV, you know, like Transparent, and they hire producers who have they've hired producers who are really versed in the independent film community to be their development executives because they want that. So it really is like company by company. But I would say there is a very hard line between comedy and drama in a lot of development worlds. So like TV Land is now making scripted shows, which is different for them. So there's a young woman there who is a development executive, and I think she worked at MTV but she had that sort of resume, and so when they were looking for this very specific type of person, she was like in perfect kind of spot to start. And there's a lot of new companies like that, and so there's I think a lot of opportunities for development executives. Whereas one of my best friends from NYU started at HBO as a comedy assistant in development. And that's a world where people really stay in their jobs. So it's harder that he would have eventually, I think, gotten promoted, but that's like a 15-year plan, I think, a little bit, from starting as an assistant there and really working your way up. So it is all really dependent on the company that you're trying to get a job at.
I think we have time for one more question. Anyone does? Okay, I'm gonna ask it. So from your time at NYU and at Tisch, what is something that you learned that you brought into the real world?
That's a good question. So many things, I'm sure. I think I really learned how to be a team player. I really loved all the people that I was on film crews with at Tisch, and that will be what continues through every job you are on. It's all about the family of the crew. The crew I'm working with right now is so amazing, and it's because every position is just as valuable to all of us, and we all treat everybody like that. And I think by switching positions at NYU and learning every job, that was really fostered in me. Also, I've never let go of this idea that I have an important voice and it's my job to share it, and that's something that NYU really, just made me responsible for right out of the gate. Fusion, I think I got on like my soapbox a little bit a few years ago, and I sent sort of a self-righteous email to all the girls in Fusion at the time, just about like, Fusion's great, but make your movies still. Don't like only produce a festival, because that's something I learned at NYU too, and I hope this is changing, but I'm a super organized person, so there's a level of me that is always happy to be that producer for other people's projects, and running a film festival is a little like that too. You're creating access ways for other people. But if you are at night thinking, I want to be a director, the only way to do that is to direct movies. Or if you want to be a writer, the only way to do that is to write. So I think there's sort of a socialized, natural thing to like step into being the organizer as a woman sometimes. I don't want to make that across the board, but something that I definitely felt a little bit and have had to fight against. But that's something I learned at NYU that I didn't want to do. And then I had to learn that lesson a few more times. But yeah, that's a big thing I learned at Tisch. Can I just say before we end, I did want to walk you guys through what is a writer's room. Would that be helpful? Okay. So there's the executive producer, usually head writer, often creator. That person is also the showrunner. if that person has no experience, let's say you leave NYU and you write the most brilliant pilot that has ever been written, and somebody wants to make it next year, and you're like, what? They are definitely not going to let you run that show. So what they'll do is send you a list of people and be like, these are people who have a ton of experience running shows. Why don't you hire one of them to be your showrunner? And then what might happen is the next season after that, you might take over as showrunner or something. So the showrunner is the person who's sort of leading the whole group. Like, they're the person who's making the costume decisions. They're going all the way through post. They are their final say on the scripts. They're in the casting decisions. They're sort of just like, which is where that thing I was just talking about, being a producer / like maker person, really comes together in being a showrunner. That's why I've always wanted to do it. You're creative and you're a producer. So they're like the head person. And then you have these executive producer, co-executive producer level people. And those people are producers. Like, your showrunner might send somebody like me to go watch an edit and help them recut something, or they might send me to watch a rehearsal, but I'm not that person quite yet, the showrunner. Those people are usually like running, like, let's say you need one room just coming up with jokes, or just coming up with episode ideas, like they call it blue skying, where you're just like pulling stuff down. You might have one of your second tier people kind of running those smaller rooms, or doing rewrites on a show that's shooting tomorrow. Those are usually delegated to your second level sort of writers. And then from there you have story editors and staff writers. So those are normally your younger writers. They're not producer level yet. They, like I said, aren't pitching their own shows yet. They don't necessarily get episode fees, which is something to know about. Like, you are hired on a weekly basis. That's why it's staff writers. You're staffed. Like, you're getting a weekly fee. Often they'll hire teams. So I've never been part of a team, but I would say that's a smart thing to maybe do, is team up with somebody, because then they get two for the price of one. And everything does come down to the budget, right, on making a TV show. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to stay a team, but it might be a smart way to get in the door sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. So those people. So a room usually consists of anywhere between 5, and like I said, anger management had 14 writers. And that has a lot to do with how many episodes you have, what kind of show it is, what the delivery schedule is. All of those things factor into how many staffed writers you have. If you're doing a show where you really are the creative voice and you're the talent and all that stuff, like Aziz Ansari, or he might, because he had so much experience on Parks and Rec, I bet he could have he went into Netflix and was like, this is exactly what I want, and he probably could have that pretty much. Other people want you to fill out a room more traditionally. It's just, that will never be the same, no matter what kind of room you've been in. I've been in rooms, like, Take My Wife literally had me and this woman Gretchen Enders and Caitlin Gill some of the time. And Cameron and Rhea would come in and tell their stories and then sort of go be amazing other places. So we wrote those episodes, and but that's 2 people writing 6 episodes, not that many episodes, so it's not that big, but it was in a very short amount of time. But that was so different than anger management. Everything will be different that way. Then you have the assistants, which I will always just be like, yes, come to me. Right now, Lauren is an assistant. She was at Fusion, and she's like my favorite person. She's
really, Lauren Gervais?
Yes.
With you? Oh, how great.
She's our script coordinator, and I didn't know. I didn't hire her. It was just a happy accident. So you have a script coordinator. That position is where you'll make the most money, because you're a coordinator title. So you are the liaison between the writing department and all the other parts of the production team. You're editing all the scripts. You're often researching. You're running clearance on the script. Like, every name, every time you mention anything, every time you pick up a bag of Lay's potato chips, all that stuff has to go through a legal company that you pay for. It's this very weird thing. That's all script coordinators. A show like 24, who has a very micromanagey head writer like Howard Gordon, who writes all his notes because he's ADD and can't have an assistant in the room, only had script coordinators. Another show might have a writer's assistant / script coordinator, where the writer's assistant will be with them through the writing of the show, and then they'll become a script coordinator once it goes into production. It all depends on budget. They're all sort of the same job, but it's really important to know the difference. You will make the most money as a script coordinator. The downside of being a script coordinator is that you aren't necessarily in the room. You are outside the room organizing everything. The writer's assistant, who traditionally does make less money, sits in the room with the writers and writes down everything they say, and maybe they're writing scripts directly in the room. A lot of the time you'll have a final draft up on a big screen, not this big, like a TV, and the writer's assistant will just be writing as you talk. Other times it's just writing down banter. Do you guys know that show, Playing House, is that it? With Lennon and Jessica St. Clair, that's the show, right? They improv their whole show in front of their writers and their writer's assistant, and then the writer's assistant writes down everything they say, and then later it's the writer's assistant's job to clean all that up, send it to them, and then from that they make the scripts, which is just because they're such amazing improvisers. But that's not normally. On anger management, we would write everything up on a board, all 4 acts, and we'd all pitch on what those things would be. And then our head writer, Rob Yulin, who's amazing, would send us off into our offices and we would split acts, and then we'd come back and put it back together. So the writer's assistant would be the one writing down all those notes, and then when we all came back, he'd be assembling it to be a script. It's always different. And then the executive producer, the showrunner I was telling you about, always has an assistant usually. So that person is scheduling their calendar. If the executive producer is meeting with costumes, like they might be researching if he's like, I really want her to look like Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct. It's like that person's, I don't know why that came to my head. It's that person's job to go and research whatever that is. So those 3 roles, and then the writer's PA, which unfortunately is basically just getting lunch. But I cannot tell you how much writers value lunch. It is ridiculous. It is so stupid. I mean, but if you're rats, right? You're rats in a cage as a staff writer in the worst way. Also, like that's not what you are really, but sometimes it feels that way. You're just doing your job. You get used to your lunch coming at exactly 12:30. It's like this weird Pavlovian response. If the lunch isn't there, everybody is like, what is happening? Like 12:33. People are just like losing their shit. It's so bad. It's so stupid. But so the writer's PA is so important because that's their job. It's so demeaning, and I'm sorry you're gonna have to do it. But if you do it well, or if you do it badly, because it's so hard to do well, because they will mess up orders. You cannot do this job perfectly. People will love you. People understand the person. People love the person who's like, oh no, they messed up. I'm going back. That like, it's so terrible, but that assistant culture still exists in Hollywood, and those are where you meet people and where you get the next jobs from. So those are the sort of 4 assistant jobs. I've been all of them, and I learned a lot that way. That's it. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.